being stopped by the police. When can the police stop me? Can they stop me for any reason whatsoever? There's sort of two answers to this. When can they stop me? They can really stop me whenever they want. When can they legally stop me? That's a different question, right? If the police officer just comes up and says, hey, do you have a second? I'd like to talk to you. And you say, sure, I would love to talk to you. No problem, right? The cop is acting completely legal because you've consented to that encounter. But usually the question is, when do I have to talk to the police? When can the police stop me and I really don't have a choice whether I get to walk away or not? Generally speaking, officers have to have some level of evidence that there is criminal activity afoot in order for them to have the legal right to stop you for any reason, to detain you in a non-consensual situation. If you're okay talking to them, great, there's no problem. But if you don't want to be there, what do they have to have in order to make you stop and talk to you? What we call it, the legal term is what we call reasonable suspicion. That doesn't mean that the cop knows that you've committed a crime. It doesn't mean that the cop knows that you're somehow definitely involved in criminal activity. It is just, as the word implies, there's some suspicion that there is some criminal activity afoot, and they are talking to you about it because they believe you would have some information about it. An example of this might be, you might have a police officer patrolling around a shopping mall. He hears glass break, and then he sees a group of kids running off in the opposite direction of where that sound came from. Does the officer know at that point that the kids broke the glass? Doesn't know. He just heard a sound and sees people running. There could be another explanation for it, but those two things put together, there's some suspicion that those kids would probably be worth talking to given the circumstances. In a situation like that, the officer, a police officer, does have the right to go and talk to somebody, to stop them at least momentarily, to figure out what's going on. So that is what the cops need to stop someone. Now, it may not be on foot. We might be driving a car. In order for a cop to pull us over, do they have to have some evidence, or can they just pull over anybody? Well, they have to have some evidence, reasonable suspicion that some sort of criminal offense or civil infraction has occurred. Someone was speeding, someone ran a red light, something like that. As long as they've got some indication that that occurred, they can pull you over and detain you to investigate that. So in the case of a speeding ticket, they've got their radar gun that they're trained to use. They see that you're going 5 miles over the speed limit, they pull you over, and they issue you a ticket or a warning or whatever it happens to be. In that instance, they do have a right to pull you over because they have some level of evidence that something went on that broke the law. Okay, but they do have to have something. They cannot pull you over just because they feel like it. They do have to have some level of evidence that they can explain to a court later on if push came to shove. Okay, so one thing that does arise with this, and something that is, I believe, an issue with the current criminal justice system, but it is something that exists. Profiling, as far as racial profiling, etc. Can an officer legally profile people? The answer is kind of, right? Like I said, an officer has to have evidence to be able to stop somebody, whether it be in their car or whether it be on the street. But the question arises, well, let's suppose you've got 10 people driving down the street and they're all speeding, right? We're on the highway, rush hour is more backed up. We're on the highway, everyone's going 10 miles an hour over, and a cop sees 9 white drivers and 1 black driver, and they decide to pull over the black driver. At that point, would that stop? Would that traffic ticket get thrown out because the officer, if we found out the officer intentionally selected the black driver to pull over? As far as the courts go, they don't, as long as there is some indication that there was criminal activity, they do not look into that. They don't examine that as part of the case. So there's a little bit of, I don't want to call it a loophole. There's a little bit of area there where, you could have a cop, if they were inclined to do that, could use, could profile a bit to make stops. One of the things that police got regularly accused of where I was at in Arizona was, where they were doing drug cases and I was helping prosecute those, you would have Hispanic individuals pulled over for drug trafficking. And the question would be, well, why are you pulling over so many Hispanic males in their early 20s? The idea of being, well, cops are just profiling. They're looking for people they think fit the profile of a crime. Why are they pulling me over? The courts won't get into those issues, so it does give a little bit of gray area there as far as the profiling issue. But so just be aware that's there. That's something that doesn't mean cops do it all the time, but it is something that a couple may use. And so just be aware that could be one of those little gray areas that we have in the law. But generally speaking, they do have to have that evidence, which is the key part there. Question.
There's one question over here. Do police have to tell you why they pulled you over? Like if you ask, do they have to tell you to be able to keep you pulled over?
Technically, no. Why they wouldn't tell you, that gets into logistics of things. Ultimately, if you are charged with a crime, when they give you a ticket, they're definitely going to have to tell you at that point, right? Let's say they pull you over for running a red light, and you ask them when you hand them your license and registration, officer, why did you pull me over? They don't have to say anything right there. They don't have to tell you. It's like, I just need your license and registration. But eventually, if they're going to charge you with something, they do have to tell you then. Right. So on the ticket, at the very least, it's the charge would be written out, why you are being stopped, what you're being cited with. OK. If we're looking at a much more serious matter, like someone gets arrested for homicide, right, murder or something like that, do the cops have to tell them we're arresting you for the murder of so and so, like they do on the shows on TV? Technically, no, but they're going to find out when criminal charges show up in court. Right. So eventually you find out. Do they have to tell you when you ask? Not necessarily, but you do eventually have to be told either on the ticket, on whatever what they call the charging document. The ticket is what's charging you with a traffic offense. You're going to have to at least find out there, and you'd find out your charges at the latest in, court if it's a lot more serious matter. So yeah, they sort of do eventually, but they don't have to do it immediately if you ask them. Great question on that.
Thank you so much.
Yep. So let me look at it. Test for seizure, right? Seizure, this isn't like when you convulse and foam at the mouth type of seizure. This is where someone is seized. You are grabbed and you are, another word we would say is detained. You are not free to leave, right? This becomes important when we're looking at this. Do the police have the right to seize us? Again, if we're looking at being stopped against our will, right? We don't necessarily want to be there. We want to go. In order to, that's sort of what we're looking at. Are we seized? If I want to leave, could I? If the answer is no, then we are detained, and then the cops got to have some level of evidence to stop us.
Let me ask you a question. Sure. To get understand. Does seize means like a handcuffed, or what is that? Like a holding?
Seized, what that means is if we're talking about being seized, you don't have to be in handcuffs to be seized, but that certainly, if you were in handcuffs, you would be seized, right? So we look here, a seizure is just, you would have to ask somebody, do you feel like you're free to leave? When the cops come and talk to me, am I free to leave? Like, could I just say, all right, have a nice day, officer, and walk down the street and expect nothing to happen? If that's not the case, I'm seized, right? So yeah, Mehmet, as you said, handcuffed, yeah, if I'm handcuffed, I'm definitely seized, right? I don't think once the handcuffs go on that I have the right to just walk down the street. It's like, oh, thanks for the handcuffs, officer. I'll see you later. No, we definitely know at that point we're not free to leave. But that doesn't mean that the handcuffs have to be on us in order for us to be seized. If we look at all the circumstances and, excuse me, if we look at all the circumstances and we do not feel like we would be free to leave, a reasonable person would think the same, then we are seized, right? Give you an example, right? There's an officer case I prosecuted where he did a traffic stop on somebody, right? And the person pulled into one of those like driveways that goes to nowhere. They've put it in the curb, but there's not a house there yet. So they can't really go anywhere. They're just pulled into that area. The officer pulled right behind them. So there was absolutely no way they could back their car out. In that instance, they haven't put handcuffs on anybody, but they're clearly not free to leave. The officer has done something that would make it clear they're not free to leave. They can't take their car and back out because the cop car's in the way. So there's actions like that that can lead someone to be seized, right? The cop doesn't have to technically place their hands on you for you to be seized. You know, if they're sitting there and they're questioning you and you say, can I leave? And they say no, that's enough for you to be seized. So it doesn't require, you know, any sort of physical restraint in order to be stopped in this regard. Okay, a great question on that. So that's what we're looking at with the, can the police stop me? The answer is they have to have some amount of evidence. They can't just stop you for any reason whatsoever, right? For those who enjoy doing it, you can get on YouTube and see different people who have encounters with the police. One of the questions you'll hear them ask when they're intentionally filming the cop is, am I free to leave? The reason people ask that is they're asking the cop, do you have any evidence to keep me? Because if you don't, I'm getting out of here. That's usually what's going on.